The small town of Glenridge was quiet, almost too quiet. Nestled between steep hills and dense forests, it was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. People went about their daily routines, tending gardens, running small shops, and sharing stories over tea in the evenings. Yet despite its calm surface, there was one story everyone whispered about. Never loudly, never in front of strangers. It was the story of the Giantess in the old laboratory. She had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, though no one really knew who had put her there or why. Some said she was a creature from another world. Others called her a mutant, a freak, or simply a monster. But everyone agreed on one thing: she was dangerous. Those who dared to approach her or even try to feed her never returned. Jacob Rowe had grown up hearing these stories. From an early age, he had felt the tension in the air whenever the topic came up. Children would dare each other to peek near the lab, and adults would shake their heads, warning them of the curse that surrounded it. But unlike most of the townspeople, Jacob did not feel fear. He felt curiosity. Jacob was a quiet man in his early 20s, with a calm demeanor that often went unnoticed. He worked at the local library, cataloging books and helping students with their research. He had always been drawn to knowledge, to understanding the world as it really was, not just through rumors or fear. The story of the Giantess fascinated him, not because of danger, but because it was a mystery that no one had ever solved. One evening, while walking home after a long day at the library, Jacob took a shortcut through the woods. He had walked this path hundreds of times, but tonight, he felt a strange pull toward the old laboratory. The building had been abandoned for decades. Its tall iron gates were rusted and the walls were overgrown with ivy. Yet in the fading light of dusk, it seemed alive. A low hum came from inside, almost like a heartbeat. He stopped at the gate and hesitated. "People say she'll kill anyone who gets close," he murmured to himself. The words of the townspeople echoed in his mind. But curiosity won over fear. He pushed the gate slowly, the rusty hinges creaking in protest. He stepped inside the courtyard, careful to avoid the overgrown weeds that clawed at his legs. Through a broken window, he saw her. She was enormous, easily 3 times the height of a normal person. Her skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, a pale green that seemed almost translucent. Her eyes were large, intelligent, and strangely sad. She did not move, yet Jacob could feel her watching him, as if she had been waiting for someone to notice her. Jacob's heart raced, not with fear, but with a strange mix of excitement and empathy. He knew that this was a creature trapped in isolation, a being who had been misunderstood for years. People had called her a monster, but Jacob saw something different. He saw loneliness and perhaps even a desire for connection. He returned home that night, but sleep did not come easily. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Giantess's eyes staring back at him. By morning, he had made a decision. He would feed her. He would not let fear dictate his actions. He would approach her carefully, respectfully, and see if he could make a connection. Jacob spent the next day preparing. He researched safe foods that could be offered to unknown creatures. He brought fruits, vegetables, and clean water. He also brought a notebook, planning to document every reaction, every movement, every sound she made. Knowledge, he believed, could protect him. As the sun began to set, Jacob returned to the laboratory. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth. The gate creaked again as he opened it. He approached the window where he had first seen her. She was still there, her eyes following him carefully. He set the food down on the ground and took a step back. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "I just want to help." The Giantess tilted her head slightly. She made no sound, but her eyes softened and she moved closer to the food. Jacob held his breath, afraid that any sudden movement might scare her away or provoke her. She sniffed the fruit, then slowly began to eat. For a long moment, Jacob simply watched. He noticed her hands, delicate, careful, almost human in their movements. He noticed the way her body moved, graceful despite her enormous size. And he noticed the relief in her eyes, the simple gratitude for being seen and cared for. Hours passed. The sun disappeared, and the night grew dark around the laboratory. Jacob knew he should leave, but he felt a strange connection forming between him and the Giantess. She did not attack him. She did not show signs of aggression. Instead, she seemed to recognize that he had risked himself to help her. When he finally stepped back toward the gate, he felt a sense of both fear and awe. People in Glenridge had warned him about danger. They had said feeding her would mean death. And yet nothing had happened. Instead, he had found a silent, living being that had acknowledged his courage and kindness. As he walked home, Jacob realized that this was only the beginning. There was much to learn about her, much to understand, and though danger might still exist, he felt a growing certainty that some bonds, unexpected, improbable, even with a giantess in a cage, were worth the risk. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought about her eyes. They had seemed almost human, filled with a longing that no one had bothered to notice. And somewhere deep down, he felt that the giantess had noticed him too, not just as a person, but as someone who had chosen kindness over fear. For the first time, Jacob understood what it meant to face a fear that everyone else accepted as truth, and to find something extraordinary waiting on the other side. The morning sun filtered through the dusty curtains of Jacob's small room, casting long golden stripes on the wooden floor. He awoke with the memory of the giantess fresh in his mind. Her enormous eyes had followed him the night before, full of curiosity and something he could only describe as trust. That trust made him feel responsible in a way he had never experienced before. Jacob dressed quickly and packed a small bag. Inside were fruits, fresh water, and a few vegetables he thought might be safe for her to eat. He also carried a notebook and a pen. He had resolved to document every detail of his interactions, to understand her better and maybe one day explain to others that she was not just a story or a monster, but a living being who deserved care. As he walked toward the laboratory, the town around him seemed unusually quiet. Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains, whispering and pointing, curious about where he was going. They had long warned him about the danger. Some had even told him tales of people disappearing, of screams heard in the dead of night, of a creature so strong it could crush anyone who entered its cage. But Jacob ignored their warnings. Fear, he decided, was a choice, and he chose to act with courage instead. The laboratory stood as it had the night before, silent and foreboding. Jacob pushed open the gate, careful not to make any noise. His heart pounded, not from fear but from anticipation. He approached the window where he had first seen her. The giantess was awake. She moved gracefully despite her size, pacing slowly in the shadowed room. When she saw him, she stopped, her eyes enormous and shimmering, fixed on him. Jacob froze for a moment. There was a tension in the air, thick and electric. This was not fear alone, it was awareness. She knew he had returned, and she seemed to be judging whether he meant harm. Jacob spoke softly. "I brought food again," he said. His voice trembled slightly, but he held his ground. "I'm not here to hurt you." She tilted her head, watching him. Slowly, she approached the food, sniffing it carefully. Jacob stepped back, giving her space. She tasted a piece of fruit, then another, moving with surprising delicacy for someone so large. The sight filled him with relief. She was not aggressive, at least not toward him. Hours passed. Jacob stayed nearby, observing her. He noticed the way her eyes followed his movements, the way she seemed to study him as much as he studied her. For the first time, he realized the depth of her intelligence. This was no ordinary animal or experiment gone wrong. This was a thinking, feeling being confined to a life of loneliness and fear. Suddenly, a noise outside made him turn. The wind rustled the trees and a loose shutter banged against the wall. The giantess flinched, her eyes widening. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He realized she had been alone for so long that even the smallest sound startled her. He stepped closer, raising his hands slowly in a calming gesture. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here. Nothing will hurt you." She seemed to understand, her breathing slowing as she settled back to her meal. Jacob made a note in his notebook. Responds to calm voice. Shows trust after reassurance. Fearful of sudden sounds. As days passed, Jacob continued to visit her. Each day he brought new foods and observed her behavior. He noticed patterns. She preferred certain fruits, reacted gently to water, and sometimes made soft, low sounds that Jacob suspected were her way of communicating. Every interaction strengthened their bond, but the more time he spent with her, the more he realized the risks. The townspeople were beginning to notice his absences, and whispers followed him wherever he went. "He's mad," some said. "The giantess will get him one day." One afternoon, while Jacob was delivering food, he saw a small group of local boys hiding behind a tree watching him. Their curiosity was obvious, but so was their fear. He tried to ignore them, focusing on the giantess, but he could feel their judgment. They had grown up with tales of danger, and now they were witnessing him risk his life for the creature. The giantess sensed something too. Her head lifted and she stared toward the window, ears, or the equivalent of ears, alert. She moved to position herself between Jacob and the outside world. Jacob realized then that she had already begun to protect him, even though he had not asked her to. "Good girl," he whispered softly, feeling a mixture of relief and awe. He made a mental note: she recognizes threat. Protective instincts are emerging. That evening, a storm rolled in. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder shook the old building. The giantess became restless, pacing back and forth. Jacob lit a small lantern and stayed close, speaking to her in a calm voice. "It's okay," he said repeatedly. "I'm here." She stopped pacing for a moment and looked at him. Her eyes, filled with what he could only call understanding, met his. Jacob realized she had learned to trust him completely. And in that trust there was a silent promise: she would not harm him. By the time the storm passed, Jacob was soaked and exhausted. He knew he should leave, but he hesitated. The bond between them had grown strong in just a few days. Leaving felt wrong. She needed someone to care for her, and he had chosen to be that person. As he stepped back toward the gate, he felt a sudden warmth of assurance. She moved to stand just behind him, positioning herself like a guardian. Jacob walked home slowly, aware that the townspeople's warnings had not come true, at least not yet. He realized that some dangers were only real if one let fear control them. That night, Jacob lay awake in his small room, thinking about the giantess. He realized that he had entered a world few dared to see. He had chosen to risk judgment, fear, and maybe even danger for the sake of connection. And in return, he had found something extraordinary: a silent, watchful companion who seemed to understand him in ways no human ever had. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, perhaps even threats from those who could not understand or accept the giantess. But he also knew one thing clearly: he could not turn back now. The bond had been formed, and it was stronger than any fear, rumor, or warning the town could offer. And somewhere deep down, he felt that this was just the beginning of a remarkable journey, one that would change both their lives forever. Days turned into weeks, and Jacob's visits to the laboratory became a part of his daily routine. He no longer approached with hesitation. Instead, he felt a sense of purpose, a quiet determination to care for the giantess and to learn from her. Each day revealed something new about her intelligence, her moods, and her quiet awareness of the world around her. The townspeople continued to whisper. Some had started following Jacob from a distance, curious about his strange friendship. "Why does he go there every day?" they asked. "Doesn't he know the stories?" But Jacob paid no attention. He had learned to separate the truth from fear, to see the giantess as she truly was rather than the frightening image painted by rumors. Inside the laboratory, the giantess had grown more comfortable with him. She no longer flinched when he approached. Instead, she would sit near him as he arranged food or documented her behavior in his notebook. Sometimes she would extend one of her enormous hands, letting him touch it lightly. The sensation was soft and surprisingly warm, a gentle reminder that she was alive and aware, not a monster to be feared. Jacob began to notice small signs of emotion in her. When he spoke to her, she sometimes tilted her head in a curious manner, as if she were trying to understand not just the words, but the meaning behind them. When he paused in his work, she would sit quietly beside him, waiting patiently. It was as if she was learning from him just as much as he was learning from her. One afternoon, Jacob brought a small mirror. He had read that some intelligent creatures could recognize themselves in reflections. Carefully, he positioned it near her face. The giantess leaned closer and stared. At first, she seemed puzzled. Then slowly, a soft, low sound came from her throat. Jacob jotted down notes. Reaction to reflection. Shows recognition. Curious and calm. Emotional engagement increasing. The bond between them grew stronger with each visit. Jacob found himself talking to her not only about her world, but about his own life. He told her about the library, about books he loved, about dreams he had for the future. Sometimes he imagined that she listened and understood, even if she could not speak the words back. There was a quiet companionship between them, a trust that neither had experienced before. But the outside world was never far away. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jacob noticed footprints near the gate. Small human footprints moving cautiously around the laboratory. He froze, his heart pounding. Someone was watching him and the Giantess. He stepped closer to her and whispered, "Stay calm. Nothing will happen if we are careful." The Giantess turned her head toward him, her eyes wide and alert. She seemed to understand the danger. Slowly, she positioned herself between Jacob and the window, a silent sentinel guarding him from whatever threat lurked outside. Jacob crouched behind a crate, keeping low and quiet. The figures outside moved slowly, peering through the rusted iron bars. Jacob recognized the local boys from the town, the same ones who had watched him weeks ago. They were daring each other to get closer, their curiosity stronger than their fear. He realized that the Giantess had already sensed them long before he had. Her body was tense, ready to act if necessary. But she did not attack. She waited, watching, and her presence alone seemed to give Jacob a sense of safety. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the boys turned away, muttering in frustration. Jacob exhaled quietly. The Giantess relaxed slightly, returning to her calm posture. Jacob realized that she was learning to protect him, even without words. She had begun to understand that he was not just a visitor bringing food, but someone important to her. Over the next few days, Jacob adjusted his routines. He became more careful, bringing food and supplies in a way that minimized attention from the outside world. He also started to train himself in reading her behaviors more accurately. A slight tilt of her head, a change in breathing, or a subtle movement of her hands could signal curiosity, trust, or alertness. Each new discovery strengthened the connection between them. One afternoon, as Jacob offered her a piece of melon, she made a soft sound that almost resembled a laugh. It was a low, bubbling sound, surprising in its gentleness. Jacob smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "She is happy," he wrote in his notebook. Trust growing. Emotional bond deepening. Jacob began to notice changes in himself as well. He was no longer simply a curious observer. He felt responsible for her, protective in a way he had never imagined. He understood that their connection was mutual. She relied on him as much as he relied on her. And with that understanding came a new sense of courage, one that would be tested in ways he could not yet foresee. One evening, as a golden sunset bathed the laboratory in soft light, Jacob spoke softly to her. "You've changed my life," he said. "I never thought I'd find someone, or something, that could teach me so much about patience, trust, and courage." She listened, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. Jacob felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that even in a world full of fear and misunderstanding, there could be moments of connection so pure that nothing else mattered. But deep down, Jacob also knew that the outside world would not remain quiet forever. Rumors would continue, and some people might attempt to see the Giantess for themselves, not understanding the trust and bond that had formed. Yet he was determined. He would not allow fear or ignorance to destroy what they had built. Together, they were learning, growing, and protecting one another in ways that no one else could understand. And in the quiet of that evening, as he packed his supplies and prepared to leave, the Giantess moved closer to the gate. Her massive hand rested gently on the ground beside him as if to say, "I am here. I am watching. I will guard you." Jacob smiled and whispered, "I know. Thank you." As he walked back through the forest toward his small home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The Giantess was no longer just a creature in a cage. She was a companion, a protector, and a friend. And though challenges were sure to come, Jacob was ready. Together they would face whatever the world had to offer. For the first time in his life, Jacob understood the true meaning of trust and the remarkable strength that comes from choosing kindness over fear. The air in Glenridge was heavy with the scent of rain. Dark clouds hung low over the hills, casting the town in a muted gray light. Jacob had spent the day preparing extra food for the Giantess. The past few weeks had been filled with small victories, trust earned, routines established, and moments of quiet companionship. But he knew that peace was fragile. The townspeople's curiosity had grown, and he sensed that someone might try to challenge the fragile trust he had built. When he arrived at the laboratory, the Giantess was waiting. She stood near the window, her enormous form silhouetted against the fading light. Her eyes tracked him as he entered, calm but alert. Jacob had come to understand that her patience was remarkable. She never acted impulsively, but she observed everything carefully. Tonight, he sensed she was more aware than ever. Jacob set down the food and spoke softly. "I brought extra today," he said. "You'll need it if the storm keeps anyone away." The giantess nodded slightly as if acknowledging both the food and the warning. The first raindrops fell, tapping against the old roof. The giantess paused in her movements, tilting her head to listen. Jacob watched her closely. Her senses were sharper than he had imagined. She seemed aware of every sound outside the walls, the creaking of branches, the rustle of small animals, and even the distant footsteps approaching the laboratory. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. The steps were deliberate, cautious. Someone was approaching. He quickly ducked behind a stack of crates, hoping the giantess would act first if anything went wrong. The giantess moved silently, her massive frame gliding across the room. She positioned herself between Jacob and the window, her eyes fixed on the approaching figure. Jacob realized then that she had truly become his guardian. Her trust in him had transformed into protection. She would not allow harm to come to him, not willingly. A man appeared at the gate, drenched from the rain. He was one of the townspeople, curious and reckless, determined to see the giantess for himself. He had heard the rumors and dismissed them as childish tales, thinking that if he confronted the creature, he could prove his courage to the town. The giantess did not make a sound. She simply stood in the doorway, her enormous presence filling the space. The man froze, staring at her. Even in the dim light, he could see the intelligence in her eyes, the silent strength that radiated from her form. Jacob watched from his hiding spot, amazed at how effortlessly she commanded the room without moving a muscle. The man took a step forward, then another, trying to appear brave. But the giantess shifted slightly, her movement deliberate and slow, yet unmistakably commanding. Jacob could see the fear in the man's eyes. He stumbled backward, muttering to himself, and turned to flee. Jacob let out a quiet sigh of relief. He realized that the giantess had acted without violence. She had simply made her presence known, and that had been enough to protect him. She had learned to use her strength wisely, to guard rather than attack, and to communicate without words. After the man left, the giantess returned to her previous position. She moved closer to Jacob, her eyes softening as she observed him. He smiled and set down the food. "You did well," he whispered. "You protected me without hurting anyone. That's incredible." She tilted her head slightly as if acknowledging his praise. Jacob felt a surge of gratitude. Their bond had grown beyond curiosity or trust. It was now a partnership. She had become his guardian and he had become hers. Together, they had created a safe space in a world that often misunderstood them both. The storm intensified outside. Rain lashed against the roof and the wind rattled the walls. Jacob decided to stay longer than usual, knowing that the giantess would be unsettled by the storm. He sat near her, speaking softly to calm both himself and her. She responded with gentle movements, leaning slightly toward him, and even making small, low sounds that reminded him of contentment. As the night progressed, Jacob reflected on the weeks that had passed. He had started this journey with simple curiosity and a desire to understand, but now he realized it had become something much deeper. He had learned patience, courage, and the importance of empathy. And he had witnessed the power of trust, the way it could transform fear into loyalty, isolation into companionship. The giantess, once a feared figure in the town's stories, was now a protector. She had taken on a role she had never been expected to play. Jacob felt a mixture of awe and responsibility. He knew that their bond would be tested again, that curiosity and fear from the outside world could return at any moment. But he also knew that they were ready. Together they had become stronger than any threat. As the rain began to subside, Jacob packed his notebook and supplies. He looked at the giantess one last time before leaving. She watched him silently, her presence reassuring. Jacob felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of connection that words could not capture. He had discovered something extraordinary, not just in her, but in the relationship they had built together. Walking home through the rain-soaked forest, Jacob felt a quiet confidence. He knew that fear could not control him, that courage and kindness had the power to change the world in unexpected ways, and he knew deep in his heart that the giantess would always be there, guarding him, silently watching over him and reminding him of the strength found in trust. That night, Jacob lay in bed thinking of the Giantess. He understood that their story was far from over. There would be new challenges, new dangers, and new lessons. But he also knew that he was not alone. For the first time in his life, he felt completely supported, completely understood, and completely connected to another being, even one so different, so extraordinary. The storm had passed, leaving the town quiet and calm once more. But Jacob knew that in the shadows, in the hidden corners of the world, remarkable things existed, things that could not be explained by fear or rumor. And he had found one such remarkable being, not through luck but through courage, compassion, and the willingness to see beyond the stories that everyone else accepted as truth. And somewhere in the laboratory, the Giantess watched, patient and unwavering, ready to guard him whenever he needed it. Jacob smiled in the darkness, feeling the quiet reassurance of her presence. Together they were ready for whatever the future might bring. The days in Glenridge grew warmer as spring approached. The forest surrounding the town was alive with birdsong and the scent of new blossoms. Yet despite the beauty of the season, Jacob felt a quiet tension in the air. Word had begun to spread about his unusual friendship with the Giantess, and not everyone viewed it with curiosity or kindness. Some townspeople whispered that he was courting danger, that the creature might one day turn against him. But Jacob no longer feared those rumors. Over the weeks, he had seen firsthand the intelligence, loyalty, and gentle nature of the Giantess. She had grown to trust him completely, and he had learned to read her emotions, to understand the subtle signals she sent. Their bond was unique, powerful, and unshakable. That morning, Jacob packed a basket with fruits, vegetables, and a small container of water. He walked along the familiar path through the woods, the sun warming his back. Birds darted between the trees, and the forest floor was dotted with wildflowers. He felt a sense of calm as he approached the laboratory, knowing that inside his companion waited. When he arrived, the Giantess was standing near the window, her massive silhouette framed by the morning light. She turned her head as he entered, her eyes meeting his. There was a recognition in her gaze, a silent understanding that went beyond words. Jacob smiled and set down the basket. "Good morning," he said softly. "I brought some breakfast." She moved closer, her enormous hands carefully taking the food. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if savoring not just the taste but the act of being cared for. Jacob sat nearby, jotting notes in his notebook. He observed her closely, noting the way she shifted her weight, the way her eyes followed his movements, and the small sounds she made that seemed to express contentment. As the morning passed, Jacob sensed something unusual. A figure was moving near the edge of the forest, watching the laboratory. The footsteps were deliberate and quiet, not the clumsy curiosity of children, but the cautious approach of someone older. Jacob felt his pulse quicken. The outside world had finally arrived. The Giantess immediately noticed as well. Her head lifted and she positioned herself between Jacob and the window, her posture alert but calm. Jacob felt a mixture of awe and reassurance. She was no longer just a creature in a cage. She was his protector, silently ready to defend him if necessary. The figure stepped closer, a man from the town, someone who had heard the rumors and come to see the Giantess for himself. He paused at the gate, unsure whether to enter. Jacob stayed low, watching as the Giantess's presence seemed to dominate the space. The man's curiosity battled with fear, and he remained frozen, staring at her with wide eyes. Without a word, the Giantess moved slightly, not aggressively but decisively, making it clear that she was aware of his intentions. Jacob realized that her presence alone was enough to protect him and to convey a message of caution. She had learned the balance between strength and restraint, between warning and harm. The man turned to leave, muttering under his breath. Jacob exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. He knew that she had acted without violence, yet her actions had been powerful enough to ensure their safety. Their bond had transformed fear into respect, and the Giantess had become a guardian in the truest sense. After the visitor disappeared, the Giantess returned to her calm, gentle self. She moved closer to Jacob, her massive hand resting beside him as a quiet reassurance. Jacob smiled and placed his own hand lightly on hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've always protected me, even when I wasn't sure you could." The days that followed were peaceful. Jacob continued his visits, and each time the bond between them grew stronger. He spoke to her about the world outside the laboratory, about books he had read, about the hopes and dreams he carried for the future. She listened, her attention unwavering, responding in subtle ways that showed understanding and empathy. The townspeople gradually began to notice that Jacob returned safely each day. Rumors persisted, but fewer people spoke aloud, and some even began to wonder if the stories of danger had been exaggerated. Jacob did not seek approval or validation. He only knew that the Giantess was no longer alone, and that he was no longer isolated in his curiosity. They had found a companion in one another, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Jacob sat on the ground near the laboratory. The Giantess leaned slightly toward him, her enormous body casting a protective shadow. He reflected on how far they had come, from the first cautious interaction to the deep trust they now shared. He realized that what they had built was rare and extraordinary, a bond that transcended fear, appearances, and expectation. "I never imagined I'd find a friend like you," Jacob said softly. "Someone who understands me without words, someone who chooses trust instead of fear. I'm grateful for you every day." The Giantess made a low, soft sound, almost like a hum, and leaned closer. Her eyes met his, full of warmth and recognition. Jacob felt a sense of peace unlike anything he had known before. For the first time, he understood that true friendship could come in the most unexpected forms, and that courage and compassion could create connections stronger than any obstacle. Night fell, and Jacob prepared to leave. The Giantess watched him carefully, standing near the gate, her posture calm but protective. As he stepped into the forest path, he felt her presence beside him, even from a distance. It was as if she were silently saying, "I am here. I am watching. You are safe." Walking home under the starry sky, Jacob felt a quiet joy. The fear that had once surrounded the Giantess had vanished, replaced by trust, loyalty, and companionship. He had risked the unknown and in return had discovered something extraordinary. Their bond was more than friendship. It was protection, understanding, and mutual respect. From that day forward, Jacob knew he would never be alone. The Giantess had chosen to guard him, not because she was forced to, but because she trusted him and valued the bond they had created. And in that trust, Jacob found a courage and peace he had never known. Glenridge remained a quiet town, full of stories and rumors. But Jacob's story, the story of a young man who chose kindness over fear, and a Giantess who chose loyalty over isolation, would remain with him forever. He had faced the unknown, and in doing so, had discovered the extraordinary power of connection, the beauty of empathy, and the remarkable strength of a guardian in the most unexpected form. And somewhere in the hidden laboratory, the Giantess waited silently, her eyes ever watchful, her heart ever loyal, ready to protect the man who had dared to see her as she truly was.